In Unit 2, Chapter 4, we begin to talk about the common musical clefs. This is an important concept for all musicians because the clef that appears on the sheet music is going to tell you how high or low the actual pitches are that need to be played. So for Chapter 4, you're going to learn about three main types of clefs. You've got the treble clef, which is reserved for the higher notes on the staff, the bass clef, which is reserved for the lower notes, and something known as a movable clef. And a movable clef can appear in many different forms using many different symbols. But the important thing is that it's a concept you need to understand. However, in this particular course, you won't be tested on identifying movable clef pitches. In this course, you're only responsible for learning the treble and the bass clef, but you should also know what the concept of a movable clef is and how it works. So first of all, the word clef originates from a French word that means key. This makes a lot of sense if you think about it, because without the actual clef system, we don't know how high or low notes are. And because there's so many notes in our musical system that go from extremely low to extremely high, we can't fit those all on a single staff. So the way of solving this is by creating all these different clefs that we use. In general, only the treble, the bass, and the percussion staves and tablature are used very commonly. However, you may still come across some of these movable clefs, like the soprano, mezzo-soprano, alto, tenor, baritone, and the French violin. Now, they're movable because they move from their default standard position. The treble clef, most commonly, you're going to see it in the position you see it in the image below. You've got a hook, a little loop that wraps around the second line. That indicates the second line is going to be named G. In the bass clef, you've got two dots on either side of the fourth line. That indicates the fourth line is going to be the note F. If you move these clefs up or down, then that loop actually changes where those notes fall. So with a French violin staff, the first line is G. With a treble clef staff, the second line is G. With a soprano clef, the line that falls right in the middle of that clef is going to be C. Mezzo-soprano, the second line is C. The alto clef, the third line is C. With the tenor, the fourth line is C. With the baritone, the fifth line is C. And when I say C, this is actually referred to as middle C, which is the C closest to the center of the piano. Percussion clefs are intended to notate any music that doesn't have specific pitch. Tablature is usually used for the guitar, and we won't be getting into that in this course. But this shows you that there's a variety of clefs, and there's actually many more clefs than what are illustrated here. But these are the most common that you'll probably see in music. And by far the most common will be the treble, bass, percussion, and tablature. So we've got the treble, bass, alto, and tenor in an image here. Each clef provides several clues for how to read the actual music. The treble clef is often called the G clef because of the loop that's on the clef that wraps around the G line. So that's the second staff line. And you can see that second staff line and how it kind of wraps around that second line. In the bass, it's often called the F clef since the two dots appear on either side of the F line. That's the fourth line of the staff. The center of the alto and tenor shows where middle C is on the staff system. In the alto, middle C is a third line. In the tenor clef, middle C is a fourth line. So the alto and tenor are considered movable clefs, but depending on where they are actually placed in the staff system, they will either be called alto, tenor, soprano, mezzo-soprano, or baritone. The important thing to know here is that the treble clef wraps around the G line and the bass clef wraps around the F line. Everything else is really extra information, just so you understand how clefs work. So the focus for a beginning musician should be solely on the bass and the treble clef. The treble clef is used typically for the higher pitches, so that's going to be anything above middle C usually. The bass clef is typically used for the lower pitches, so anything below middle C. Here we have a layout of a complete piano keyboard. If you'll look at the register where the number 4 is marked, there's a grayed out key. That key, as you should know by now, is a C. It happens to be middle C, and you can identify it because it's a C that's very close to the middle of the piano. So on most modern pianos, you have 88 keys. There's going to be 52 white keys and 36 black keys. There are some pianos that actually have an extended lower range and additional pitches. Some keyboards won't have all 88 keys. So if you are looking for a keyboard, you really want to try and find one that has at least 88 keys, because that will give you the full range of pitches that are available to you. So in the treble clef, in this image up on the top, you can see how the treble clef looks a little bit like a stylized G, both an uppercase and a lowercase g. And that's really what the treble clef is based on. We always place our clef at the beginning of the staff system. You see in the next image, where it says middle C, you've got the treble clef and then the C sitting right below the staff. So middle C in the treble clef is a name for the note that has one short line through the middle of the note and is placed below the staff. It's something you should know. It's something you need to learn in this chapter, actually. We also call middle C C4. The number 4 refers to the octave register. So if we go back here, you can see how each one of these registers has a number associated with it. This is a concept we're going to get into in more detail a little bit later. But the lowest octave register, as you can see, only consists of 3 keys on a standard piano. The first octave register, you'll see it has 12 keys. The second octave register also has 12, then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 only has 1. So the higher you get on the piano, or any instrument for that matter, the higher the number goes. So notes that are lower than middle C will use lower numerical values, such as C3, C2, C1, C0. Notes that are higher than middle C will use higher numerical values, C5, C6, C7. This is going to be something that trips some of you up on your quiz. When you write in your answers for octave registers, if you're required to, then you need to make sure you write the note name using a capital letter and one numerical value, and don't put any spaces in there so the system doesn't automatically count a question wrong for not following the directions. So the treble clef typically indicates the performer will play notes higher than middle C, but this rarely applies in a practical setting. And what that means is that often you're going to actually have notes that go a little bit below middle C. If you play the trumpet, a B-flat trumpet, you might see a note all the way down to a G below middle C, or even an F. But G is generally the lowest note unless you have some special configuration on your trumpet. So this is just sort of a general guideline for piano writing, that if you have notes above middle C, they're in the treble. If you have notes below middle C, they're in the bass. So middle C is just kind of our dividing line between the two staff systems. So I want to make sure this is very clear. There's a few features of the treble clef. The first one is that it's a stylized G. You can see how the treble clef looks like 2 overlaid cursive G's. If you look at the blue box, that shows you where the uppercase G appears. Everything in the red box shows you the lowercase g. Another feature is the loop, which I've already talked about, but that second line on the treble clef, there's a loop that wraps around it. That's always going to be the note G4, which tells us it's the G in the 4th octave register on the piano or any instrument for that matter. And remember that the treble clef is also known as the G clef. So this is something that will take you a little bit of time, but when identifying the notes of the treble clef, we use a musical alphabet, just like on the keyboard. The first sign is going to be E, and then it just moves up alphabetically. E, F, and G. Once you hit G, you have to start over again at A. You should already understand this concept from the keyboard note identification. However, if you don't, just know that our musical alphabet goes from A to G, and then it starts over again. So after G, we go to A, and then B, C, D, E, F, and G sitting on top of the staff. There is a way to go above or below the staff, as you've seen. This middle C, it's actually right below the staff, and you just put a line through it. That line's called a ledger line, but we'll talk a little more about that in a minute. So just like the treble clef, the bass clef is placed at the beginning of the staff system. This is going to be true for all clefs. It happens before anything else on the staff system. It's always the first thing you write into your staff when you're creating a new score. Middle C in the bass clef is a name for the note that has one short line through the middle of the note and is placed above the staff. You can see how it's above instead of below. So middle C is also C4. That means if you see middle C in the treble clef or the bass clef, they're both going to sound the same. We just choose the bass clef for lower bass instruments and the treble clef for higher instruments. So again, C indicates a note name, 4 indicates the register that middle C falls within. Same concept here, where lower notes than middle C will use lower numerical values, higher notes will use higher numerical values. The bass clef will typically indicate that the performer will play notes lower than middle C, and again, like the treble clef, it's rarely applied in a practical setting. Most instrumentalists that play in the bass clef will actually play notes way above middle C. But again, the notes for most instruments do commonly fall in the bass clef system, especially if you're looking at piano music. So now we're going to talk about a few of the features of the bass clef. The first thing you need to know is that the bass clef is basically a stylized F. It looks like a cursive F. If you look at the image in the upper portion of your screen, the upper right portion, you'll see the F and the bass clef look very similar. Now the stem on both the cursive F and the bass clef have a similar stem. They look the same, right? They both curve off to the left. The arm and leg of the cursive F correspond to the 2 dots on the bass clef. That's the horizontal portion of the F. Those are the arms and the legs. The second feature is the dots. There are 2 dots in the bass clef that surround the F line. This is important because those 2 dots tell you where F is. And feature 3 is the ball of the bass clef. The ball of the bass clef will reach down and circle the F line. If you see it on the 4th line, that little ball is sitting right on the F line. So there's a few different ways to indicate where F is. Now when composers actually write bass and treble clefs, they don't usually pay that much attention to where the ball falls, but they will always put the dots in the right place on either side of the F line. Otherwise, that would cause confusion. So when you're identifying the notes of the treble clef, it's the same concept as with the bass clef. The only difference here is the space right below the staff begins on F. So then you just count alphabetically. You move through the alphabet. F, G. Remember, after G, we got to start over. So then we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then A on the top line. So when you're taking these drills, complete these drills as many times as possible until you can get 100%. Because if you don't know the note names, you're going to have a lot of trouble as this course progresses. Knowing how to identify notes in the treble and bass clef, even if it takes you a few minutes, that's okay at first. But you should get to a point where you just know these note names just by looking at them, so you don't have to think about it anymore. One last concept, the movable clef. I've talked a little bit about this, but I want to show you very clearly what a movable clef means and what it can look like. So in a movable clef, the position of the clef determines the notes. Odd placements may cause some confusion. If you aren't careful and you write your treble clef on the first line, your performer is going to wonder if you just moved the location of the G or if that was a mistake. And then they'll have to consult with other players and play through the piece in various ways to try and figure out what it was that you intended. So they waste rehearsal time and they may contribute to poor interpretations because since it's a third apart, there's a possibility they'll think that your mistake was correct. And that's a more advanced concept that we won't be getting into, but generally if you move in thirds, it's gonna sound okay in most pieces. Also, notice how the G4 and the F3 are changed. In the treble clef, the clef is just lowered. In the bass clef, it's also lowered. So wherever those 2 dots are in the bass clef are, that's where F is going to occur. Wherever the loop is on the treble clef, that's where G is going to occur. So practice your note name drill several times until you really understand how to identify notes on the staff system, because if you don't, this course will get much harder.